I looked down at my hands, saw what looked like blood dripping from my fingers, and thought, well, I've finally done it. I've committed a felony over vegetables. But don't call the cops yet. It was beet juice. Deep red, dramatic, and freshly spilled because Vivian Caro decided today was the day to sneak onto my land and dump weed killer on my entire fall harvest. If you've never had a neighbor try to assassinate your carrots, consider yourself lucky. I caught her red-hand, or red-palmed if we're being literal, and next thing you know, I'm standing in front of my root cellar, locking it behind her and calling the sheriff. You ever have one of those moments where you realize you might be starring in your own Dateline episode? That was mine. Drop your story in the comments. Maybe yours is even crazier than mine. You won't believe your eyes when you see what Vivian Caro, the self-proclaimed HOA queen of the neighborhood, did to try to destroy my life. But let's rewind before you start picturing me as some deranged squash vigilante. My name's Noah Whitaker. 3 years ago, I was just another overworked civil engineer in downtown Chicago. Woke up to deadlines, spent my days managing other people's messes, and fell asleep to the sound of traffic, pretending it was rain. The kind of job that pays for lattes but robs you of purpose. When my grandfather passed and left me his 5-acre homestead in northern Wisconsin, I did what every burnt-out 42-year-old dreams of but never actually does. I left, sold the condo, packed my files, negotiated remote work, and traded in my skyline view for rows of beans, a compost pile, and the smell of dirt that doesn't come from city construction. It felt like waking up after a 20-year nap. The land was perfect, in that memory-laced kind of way. 2-story farmhouse built like a tank, a greenhouse that hadn't given up yet, and a chicken coop with more personality than my last office. But the crown jewel? The root cellar. Dug deep into a hillside by my granddad, it was an underground vault for pickles, potatoes, and secrets. Cool, dry, and just weird enough that I gave tours to anyone who visited. The cellar even had a composting toilet, because Grandpa believed in preparedness and unconventional plumbing. For 6 months, life was slow and rich. I coded by day, gardened by dusk, and got real good at talking to plants. My closest neighbors were an elderly couple who dropped off jam and compliments like clockwork. It was peace on earth, until Vivian Caro showed up, like a bad plot twist. Vivian moved into the mansion next door, a house made of glass, stone, and contempt. She was 56, looked 42, and moved like she expected everyone to part the sidewalk for her. I later learned she ran a string of upscale boutiques, which explained the heels, the perfume cloud, and her talent for pretending small talk was beneath her. Her first words to me weren't hello or nice to meet you, but your chickens are disturbing my morning meditation. I told her I didn't own a rooster, just hens, and she looked at me like I'd said I'd bathe in gasoline. The next week, I got a letter from the county about a supposed violation. Coop too close to the property line. It wasn't. But that didn't stop the complaints, from compost odors to unsightly tomato steaks. I didn't realize I'd moved next to the president of a one-woman HOO that didn't legally exist. Still. I tried to be neighborly, smiled, waved, ignored the invitations I never received to her garden parties. But it escalated. One day, a real estate agent showed up offering to buy my land for 60% of what it was worth. I asked if his client preferred her vegetables pre-poisoned or just emotionally manipulated. He didn't laugh. That's when I started installing cameras. And I'm glad I did, because a week later I caught Vivian creeping near the chicken coop, releasing what looked like a raccoon. That's the day I stopped planting for fun and started documenting for court. So yeah, when I caught her with that bottle of industrial weed killer, ready to destroy everything my grandfather built and I nurtured, I locked her in that root cellar and hit record. Call it impulsive, call it crazy. But after months of sabotage, gaslighting, and threats disguised as etiquette, I call it Tuesday justice. And trust me, this was just the beginning. She didn't hate my chickens because they clucked too loud or wandered into her yard. No, Vivian Caro hated my chickens because they didn't match her aesthetic. In her world, landscaping was supposed to come from glossy catalogs, and animals were allowed only if they had a bow tie or their own Instagram account. My hens, scrappy, productive, loud in the mornings and proud about it, were an affront to her curated view. "They just don't fit the vibe," she said once, like we were discussing art, not livestock. But this wasn't Malibu, and the vibe was Wisconsin farmland with a side of mud. Still, she launched her silent campaign of beautification by harassment, and her opening act? Code violations, on land that wasn't even under an HOA. You ever get a letter from the county that reads like it was written by someone personally offended by your zucchini? That's how it started. One week it was your compost pile may pose a nuisance to nearby residents. The next, the structure housing your chickens appears unpermitted. And my favorite, concerns have been raised about the height and visibility of certain garden fixtures. They meant my tomato cages. Apparently my tomato stakes offended her shrubs. Each complaint came from a concerned neighbor, which was bureaucrat speak for Vivian with a clipboard. The county inspected. Every time. And every time they found nothing wrong. But it didn't matter. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to wear me down. Like a dripping faucet in pearls. What made it worse was her social warfare. She hosted wine and linen events every other weekend. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months suddenly showing up in khakis and sundresses, sipping things with floating fruit while I watched from my porch, dirt on my jeans, hose in hand. Invitations never came my way, of course. The message was clear. I wasn't part of the vision. One of the older neighbors later told me that during one of Vivian's soirees, she compared my garden to a third-world food experiment. That one stuck with me. My grandfather had planted these beds with his bare hands, and she called them an eyesore, between refills of sparkling rosé. She didn't just dislike my land. She wanted to erase it, quietly, elegantly, with white gloves and a low-ball offer. It came via a well-groomed realtor in a suit too shiny for a dirt road. He stood on my porch like a vacuum salesman from the 50s, except instead of a demo, he handed me a folder with a buyout offer that was insulting even by corporate standards. "A generous proposal for a property with diminishing neighborhood value," he said. I asked him if Vivian sent him, or if he just happened to show up the day after she gave me a death stare over some overgrown kale. He smiled like a man who'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "My client prefers to remain anonymous," he said, as if Vivian's SUV with the boutique logo wasn't parked in her driveway like a signature on bad behavior. I told him thanks, but no thanks. I grow stubborn faster than my squash vines. That's when I knew this wasn't just about noise or looks or chickens, it was about control. Vivian wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was trying to colonize the countryside, one picket fence at a time. And the scariest part? She didn't have to win to ruin me, she just had to outlast me. And she thought I was soft, a city guy with soft hands and idealistic dreams, who'd fold the first time he got a code violation. But what she didn't know was I'd been raised by a man who believed every problem had a root, and you didn't quit until you pulled it out with both hands. I wasn't going anywhere, and the next time she crossed the line, I'd have more than tomatoes ready. Stay with me, because this root war, it's just getting juicy. When a fox showed up at my coop the night after Vivian strutted by with a mysterious little cage tucked under her arm, I stopped doubting and started recording. The chickens were squawking like a Baptist choir on revival night, feathers everywhere, but thankfully no casualties. My security light had scared off whatever she released, but that wasn't the point. You don't carry a cage unless you plan on relocating something. Or someone, and unless Vivian was dabbling in wildlife rescue between gossip sessions, I had a solid guess what she was up to. That was the moment my garden stopped being a sanctuary and became a stakeout. And let me tell you, I went full Hitchcock with Wi-Fi. I installed 4 cameras the next day, all discreet, all pointed at the vulnerable spots. The cope, the greenhouse, the edge of my driveway. I told myself it was for peace of mind, but let's be honest, I wanted proof. Hard, undeniable, hold it up in court kind of proof. 2 nights later, I got it. There she was, on the playback, Vivian, in her yoga pants and patio sneakers, creeping along the hedgerow like a suburban panther. She paused, looked around, then dumped a pile of trash right by my compost bin and scurried off like she was late for Pilates. A few nights after that, same routine. Only this time she sliced my garden hose like she was auditioning for a slasher film. If passive aggression were an Olympic sport, she'd have taken gold. I compiled all the clips, time-stamped, dated, edited for clarity, and drove straight to Sheriff Walker's office the next morning. Now, Sheriff Walker is a no-nonsense guy who's been chewing the same toothpick since 1993. He watched the footage with the same expression he probably uses on drunk uncles at Thanksgiving brawls. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, hell." That about summed it up. He agreed to talk to her. Maybe a warning would put her back in her lane, but legally, it was a gray area. Hard to press charges, unless she's physically on your property during an incident, he said, his voice even but laced with rural realism. You've got smoke, son, but I need fire. That night, I doubled down. Upgraded the whole system, motion alerts, infrared, remote access, you name it. I even added a silent alarm that would ping my phone if anyone so much as breathed near the root cellar. My grandfather used to say, "Don't build a fence, build a reason they don't want to climb it." So I didn't just protect my cellar, I turned it into a vault. Fort Knox for vegetables. I hid the real lock, an electronic latch, behind a decoy padlock she could fiddle with all she wanted. And yes, I tested the system with the same obsessive energy usually reserved for heist movies. If she came back, I'd have everything short of a confessional. The thing about preparing for war is that you start to think like your enemy. I began spotting patterns. Her car always gone during odd hours. Motion lights tripped when I wasn't home. The way my compost pile was disturbed just enough to look accidental. They say paranoia is unhealthy, but sometimes it's just wisdom in work boots. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Because with Vivian, there was always a next move, and I had a gut feeling she wasn't done. What I didn't know then was how far she was willing to go, or how deep her reasons really ran. Keep listening, because the real rot, it wasn't in the vegetables. It was buried way deeper. She brought weed killer, I brought Wi-Fi and a conscience. That's how the showdown started. It was late October, one of those sharp Wisconsin nights where the air smells like burning leaves and your breath reminds you you're still alive. I was finishing up a coding project when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Pulled up the camera feed, and there she was, Vivian Caro, in my garden, in the dark, holding a tote bag the size of a gilt complex and fiddling with the decoy lock on my root cellar like she'd watched a YouTube tutorial titled "How to Break and Enter with Confidence." My thumb hovered over the app. And in that second, between fury and clarity, I made a choice. I hit the lock button. Quiet little click came through the speaker, and I watched as Vivian, now inside, turned back to the door and pulled. Nothing. She tugged again, her eyes widened. Then she dropped the act and started pounding like a banshee at a barn dance. I didn't flinch. I had video of her breaking in, chemicals in hand, and everything she said, every threat, every squeal of indignation was being recorded from 3 angles. I called Sheriff Walker, explained everything, emphasized she was safe, contained, and had full access to light, airflow, and even a composting toilet. His response was pure country calm. "Sit tight, I'm an hour out. Pile up on the state road." So there I was, sitting on my porch with a hot mug of peppermint tea, watching a woman destroy her reputation in high definition. About 20 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes purred into my driveway like it had never touched gravel in its life. Out stepped Gregory Caro, a corporate attorney with the posture of a man used to making judges nervous. He didn't knock, just looked me square in the eye and said, "Where's my wife?" No pleasantries, no warm-up, just straight to courtroom mode. I told him she was in the root cellar, unharmed, and we were waiting on law enforcement. Then I played him the footage. He watched silently, his face tightening in small practice degrees, like a man building a case against gravity. When it ended, he took a slow breath and said, "This is false imprisonment, Mr. Whitaker. You've made a serious mistake." I smiled the kind of smile you reserve for tax season and in-laws. Actually, under state law, I'm allowed to detain a person committing a felony on my property until authorities arrive, as long as they're safe and I report it immediately. I gestured to the heater, the lighting, the toilet. She's more comfortable than most folks in a bus station. He didn't like that, but he didn't argue it either. He followed me into the house and sat down stiffly across from me at the kitchen table. I offered him coffee. He declined. We watched the feed together as Vivian, realizing her husband had arrived, began performing for the camera like she was auditioning for daytime TV. Tears, gasps, claims of innocence, the whole act. Then came the best part. She pulled out the jug of weed killer and started dumping it down the drain in the cellar floor. I nearly clapped, because that drain, it wasn't just plumbing. It led to a sealed runoff tank installed specifically to monitor soil contamination. Every drop of her sabotage was being collected, labeled, and time-stamped. Gregory looked at the screen, then at me. "You seem prepared." I nodded. "You start farming next to a woman who files complaints about tomato steaks and compost smells, you learn how to cover your bases." But the longer we sat, the more I noticed something shift in him. Less anger, more concern. Like he wasn't just trying to scare me into silence. Like he was scared about something else. That's when I realized Vivian's little tantrum wasn't just about chickens or aesthetics. It was about hiding something big. And suddenly, locking her in that cellar felt less like retaliation and more like uncovering the first crack in a much deeper secret. Stick with me. Because what came next made root vegetables look shallow. Sheriff Walker arrived just past midnight, headlights washing over the frostbitten lawn like a searchlight at a county fair. He stepped out of his patrol truck with the steady gait of a man who's seen it all and still prefers black coffee to drama. Gregory and I met him at the porch. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, nodding as he removed his hat. "Sounds like we've got ourselves a situation." I walked him through the events, showed him the footage, and laid out the evidence like I was presenting a science fair project titled "How to Catch a Saboteur in Yoga Pants." He grunted through most of it, eyes squinting as Vivian dumped the chemicals on camera. "She knew exactly what she was doing," he said flatly. "This ain't no neighborly spat. This is criminal mischief, maybe worse." But what he said next, that's when the room changed. He looked directly at Gregory. "You got anything to say about your wife's behavior tonight?" Gregory hesitated. It wasn't the pause of a man caught off guard. It was the kind of delay that said he'd rehearsed this moment and still hated every version of it. "There may be context," he said slowly, like each word cost him a year of reputation. "This land, Mr. Whitaker's land, used to be part of a larger holding. My wife's family once operated an industrial chemical business here in the 70s. It was shut down, sold off. Quietly. Very quietly." I blinked. "Wellington Chemical?" I asked. He nodded. That name, faint memory, was stamped on an old steel drum I'd found buried near the property line years ago. We'd joked about it being a relic. Turned out, it was a warning label in disguise. Gregory's face was locked in something between guilt and dread. "There was supposed to be a full cleanup before the land was parceled out," he said. "But corners were cut. Vivian oversaw part of the closure process before the business was sold. She was fresh out of grad school and already running logistics. If anyone knew where the bad stuff was buried, it was her. That's when it hit me. Her campaign to drive me out wasn't personal in the petty sense. It was personal in the legal sense. If I stayed, I'd dig. And if I dug, I'd find exactly what they'd tried to forget. I felt the ground shift under me. Not metaphorically. Literally. The cellar, the garden, the entire farm. It could all be sitting on poison disguised as soil. And I'd been feeding people from it. We walked out to the cellar in silence. I unlocked the door. Vivian burst out like a stage actor hitting her mark. Tears, outrage, the full production. But the sheriff wasn't buying tickets. He raised his hand and cut her off mid-performance. "Save it, ma'am. We've got you on tape. 3 angles, in hand, no jury on earth's gonna believe you were just taking a moonlight stroll." Her face crumpled for half a second, just long enough to see fear slip past the mask. Then she snapped. "You have no right. Those cameras are on my property," she screamed. I shook my head slowly. "Survey says otherwise. That camera is 10 feet inside my fence line, and the cellar's on land I've owned since the day my granddad signed it over." Then I dropped the final hammer. "And by the way, the chemical runoff you dumped, it's been collected, sealed, tested." Her eyes widened as if I'd read her browser history aloud. Sheriff Walker nodded grimly. "Vivian Caro, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted destruction of property, and possibly environmental crimes, pending chemical analysis." He read her rights as he gently took her arm, but her mind was already in meltdown. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "If anyone tests that soil, the liability, it'll ruin everything." She turned to Gregory, desperate, but he was already stepping back, face pale. "You told me it was handled," he whispered. She didn't answer, and that silence said everything. As she was led to the patrol truck, she didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared at the house, at me, at the land she tried to erase, like it had finally turned on her. But here's the thing. Land doesn't forget, and soon neither would the people. Don't blink now, because what we unearthed next shook more than roots. It cracked history wide open. If she hadn't tried to poison my beets, she might have gotten away with poisoning the whole county. Funny how that works. One vindictive act in a cellar led to a statewide investigation, national headlines, and the televised downfall of a woman who thought she could bulldoze the past with a spray bottle and a fake smile. Vivian Caro was convicted on multiple counts: breaking and entering, attempted destruction of property, falsifying environmental records, and knowingly covering up industrial waste. The trial had everything America loves: a villain in pearls, a humble farmer with a tech background, and a root cellar full of metaphors. When the sentence came, 7 years in federal prison, $4,500,000, 0 cents in fines, and a public apology published in every major newspaper, I didn't cheer. I exhaled. Because justice, like compost, takes time to break down. But when it does, it feeds something better. The land didn't heal overnight. Corporate cleanup crews came in hazmat suits, removing topsoil like they were peeling off the farm's scar tissue. Olivia, yes, that Olivia, my environmental consultant and now, spoiler alert, my wife, oversaw the remediation. Every inch of the property was tested, mapped, and restored with surgical precision. They even found a few old barrels buried near the east tree line, leftovers from Wellington Chemicals' midnight dumping days. Turns out that side of the farm had always struggled to grow anything, and now we knew why. Still, the damage, while serious, was containable. The vegetables I'd harvested were tested. Most of them passed. The ones that didn't? Burned. Better a scorched beet than a poisoned neighbor. And for the first time since I moved in, I looked at that field and didn't see risk. I saw redemption. The root cellar, once a place of preservation, then confrontation, became a monument. Olivia and I transformed it into a tiny museum and environmental learning center. We kept part of it traditional: shelves lined with canned goods, baskets of potatoes, educational signage about food storage. But the rest? We made it a story. Glass cases displayed contaminated soil samples next to clean ones. An interactive display explained the cleanup process. And yes, in one small, well-lit case, we placed the very bottle of weed killer Vivian tried to use on my harvest. We labeled it the Catalyst. School groups toured the site, reporters filmed documentaries, and every time I heard a child say, "Wait, this really happened?" I nodded, smiled, and said, "Yep, right here." Because one woman thought dirt could keep a secret. Gregory Caro filed for divorce quietly and quickly after the conviction. But to his credit, he didn't disappear. he did the opposite. Gregory retooled his high-profile legal career into something more honest. He started representing victims of corporate environmental negligence, often pro bono. I got a letter from him one day. It was short. "Some debts," he wrote, "can't be paid back in full. But I can spend the rest of my career trying." He even helped fund a new scholarship at the local college for students studying environmental law. The name? The Whitaker Fellowship. I laughed when I heard about it. Not bad for a guy who used to think kale was just garnish. As for me, I stayed. Olivia and I got married in the field behind the farmhouse, surrounded by wildflowers and guests sitting on hay bales instead of pews. Our wedding favors were little seed packets of sunflowers and milkweed, plants that heal soil and attract pollinators. We rebuilt the greenhouse, this time with a section dedicated to phytoremediation experiments. My chickens returned, clucking with the confidence of creatures who'd survived war, and that farm, once a battleground, became a symbol. Universities partnered with us to test sustainable methods, environmental groups held retreats on the land, and every fall, we hosted what we called the Root Festival, celebrating soil, stories, and second chances. People ask me sometimes if I ever feel sorry for Vivian. My answer's complicated. I feel sorry that someone could become so detached from truth that they'd rather bury it than face it. I feel sorry that she saw legacy as something to protect at all costs, even when that cost was people's health and land's integrity. But I don't regret that justice was served, because the truth is, land remembers. It remembers what you plant in it, whether it's roots or revenge. But it can forgive too, if you let it breathe, and this land, it's breathing again, so am I. And all of it started with a beat. And now that you've heard it all, from the chickens to the chemicals, from sabotage to sunflowers, I hope you understand why I stayed, not just for the land, not just for my grandfather's legacy, but because sometimes when the world hands you a mess wrapped in silence and shame, the most powerful thing you can do is talk about it. This wasn't just about one neighbor from hell. It was about accountability, truth, and the kind of stubborn hope that keeps growing even in bad soil. I didn't expect to become a symbol. I just wanted to grow vegetables. But somewhere between Vivian's weed killer and the courtroom gavel, this story became bigger than me. It became about what we allow, what we ignore, and what we're willing to fight for, quietly, firmly, and legally. I'm not perfect. I locked a woman in a root cellar, for heaven's sake. But I did it to protect the truth, and sometimes that's the hardest crop to raise. This land gave me clarity, justice, and a partner who believes in both. That's worth every shovel of dirt. So if you're sitting there thinking, man, that was a ride, do me a favor, take this story with you, share it, talk about it. Let it be a reminder that no matter how buried the truth may be, someone with a shovel, a camera, and a little courage can still dig it up. And if you've ever been pushed around by someone in power, someone with a clipboard, a badge, or a last name that opens doors, know this. You don't need a title to stand your ground. You just need to know where your roots are. If this story moved you, if it made you laugh, think, or maybe even look at your neighbor's hedge a little differently, then hit that like button, drop a comment below, and tell us your story, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Around here, we don't just grow vegetables, we grow justice. And trust me, the next harvest, you'll want a front row seat. Until then, take care of your land, take care of your truth, and whatever you do, don't underestimate a farmer with Wi-Fi.